Welcome to your Future Therapist podcast. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about loneliness. And I'm your co-host, Kelly Newsom, and I'm sitting here with Megan Lachowski.
Hello, I'm Megan.
And we want to first introduce ourselves since it's our first episode. Again, I'm Kelly. I am a future therapist and current life coach. And my purpose in my life is to help as many people find the power within them to achieve change, to find their dreams and to connect with who they really want to be. And this podcast is just one avenue to obtain and live out that purpose. So I'm really excited for it. And as an introvert, I have never been kind of more pumped to be a motor mouth in my entire life. So I'm really excited for this. How about you, Megan?
Well, I'm also very excited, even though I'm an extrovert and I love talking. Above all, though, I'm most passionate about helping people grow. I want to understand everything I can about how humans think, connect, and learn. I have been interested in the field of psychology since high school, and I studied psychology and anthropology in college, focusing on intersectionality and cross-cultural studies. I'm not currently in the market for becoming a therapist like Kelly is, but this podcast allows me to expand my own perspective, to learn, to hopefully contribute to helping others just by having normal discussions with someone about a common and not talked about issue.
Yeah. And so today, like I mentioned, we are talking about loneliness. And I think three things that I really want anyone who's listening to this episode to know is that one, you're not alone. You're definitely not broken by your loneliness. I want you to know that there are ways to care for yourself through your loneliness, and that it's not something to hate or to totally remove from your life. I think it's very common occurrence for many people, if not almost everybody, whether they understand it or not. And if you're not understanding loneliness, or feel that this is something that's challenging for you, then I just invite you to listen to the podcast and learn new perspectives about loneliness and how it affects others, because definitely people can use more empathetic friends and family members. And so those are kind of not only just my thoughts on this podcast, but how I look at what I want people to get from it.
Yeah, the
So,
first thing that comes to my mind, real quick, as you say that, is that I think that there are some people in this world who aren't lonely, or they don't regularly feel lonely. So it's not something that they really consider. And then there's a lot of people who do feel lonely a lot of the time. And I think that there's kind of a disconnect between people who don't usually feel it and the people who feel it a lot. And it's almost like both sides don't know that the other exists and don't know what it's like for the other side. And so I think it's important, like you said, where people who don't regularly feel lonely, I think it's important for them to listen to this type of discussion so that they can understand how people who do feel lonely feel. And then hopefully the people who do feel lonely will be able to feel more connected to the people who might not have understood before how they might be feeling.
yeah, and what's crazy and timing, I mean, I think loneliness is a topic that we're hearing a lot about because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And not everyone went through the pandemic feeling loneliness, right? And
Right.
so I think, what we're going to do today is not only talk about maybe the root of some of people's loneliness or situational issues as far as what spurs on loneliness, but also how to work with it. And so we're definitely
Mm-hmm.
going to talk about systems that can be created, and what I think is like one of the number one ways to really deal with any life challenge that you come across, and that's self-reflection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And taking the time to see and be honest and truthful about the situation that you're currently in, and really investigate how you participate in the world within
Yeah.
this challenge that you're experiencing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited about this. And I think it's actually really good timing with everything that's going on just at work. I work at UC Davis, and just in our department, or the college that I work in, the topic of loneliness has come up several times that, staff are feeling lonely even at work, even when they're
Mhm.
actually in the workplace and on
That's
site.
that's great that it's coming up as a discussion in the workplace because you don't usually hear about that happening.
No, but I think it's just so prevalent and
Hmm.
people, along with loneliness, like I kind of feel that it's tied to other aspects of our lives, such as, or
Hmm.
challenges such as depression,
Hmm.
right? Like sometimes it comes in tandem with other areas of our life or other life's challenges or feelings or
Yeah,
emotions. It might not just be singularly loneliness, but tied
right.
to many other things like self-worth and depression and
Hmm.
situational issues that you come across on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So I thought what we would do is kind of talk about what exactly loneliness is and what some root causes can be. And then we'll talk about our own experiences. I actually have a first memory of loneliness that I want to share. And then we'll go over experiences of people who wrote in.
Hmm.
Had a few people on Instagram comment on scenarios or actual things that make them feel lonely.
Hmm.
And then we'll talk about how to work with loneliness. And I think we have some good feedback for that.
Well, well,
Okay.
not cool that people are feeling lonely,
No,
but
I get it. I understand what you're
good that
saying.
people are reaching out.
Yes. So what is loneliness? So like I mentioned earlier, it is a normal part of being human and living this life. It's really incredibly common. Like, even though it's very isolating and it feels, I know I feel desperate when I'm feeling lonely. And obviously, I feel alone in my loneliness, if that makes sense. But the truth of the matter is that it's really a common experience for people.
Hmm.
And so we are not truly alone. There are others, people next to us, people that we talk to every day that are experiencing the same things that we are.
Hmm.
It's, I mean, technically it's an emotional state, right? It's different from being physically alone. That's not the same thing. Having loneliness and feeling that loneliness is not the same as being physically alone.
Hmm.
It's subjective and it's personal to your own individual experiences and history. I can tie back my loneliness to childhood trauma. Other people, it might not be from childhood trauma. It might just be from experiences that they, have in a work setting or in a relationship that just kind of spurs on these feelings. And they grow into something that might happen more commonly than they're used to. What do you think about that, Megan?
I completely agree. I think that it is it is definitely an individual thing. And one of the words that stuck out to me when you were describing it is desperation. And I think that that's not something that a lot of people associate with loneliness, but I think it's so true that when we are feeling lonely, there often is a desperation there, and it will manifest in different ways depending on what the situation is. Like you said, if it's something in the workplace or something with our childhood trauma or our current romantic relationship, we're usually desperate for something that we're not getting. And it's not always as simple as that we don't have somebody to talk to. It's often much deeper than that. And so I just thought that that was an interesting connection that I think a lot of people wouldn't make, that I hadn't really thought of those two words together until you said that, but it really clicked for me as definitely desperation is definitely something that's usually prevalent when we're feeling lonely.
And and as an example, again, for the pandemic, there might have been a lot of people. I mean, we all went through the pandemic, but there might be a lot of people that just never had experienced loneliness until they were
Mm-hmm.
totally isolated and had to distance themselves from others because of, laws and or
Mm-hmm.
rulings or, expectations at work or in, retail stores that you go. I mean, all of the environment that we're typically used to going to freely and being, without a mask and all of those criteria just helped to create this very lonely experience of going through the pandemic. So
Yeah.
So, root causes of loneliness, again, it is so much based on your personal history. And when we think about, for me, I will talk about childhood trauma. And I just do want to note that when you are bringing things up from your childhood, it's not that my parents or the experiences that I had purposefully happened to me so that I could, have this challenging life that I feel like that I've had emotionally. It but what it does, what happens when you're a child and you have these experiences, that it really just forms the perception of yourself and how you are in the world. And from those experiences and the perception that who you believe you are, that is then what happens as you grow up. You constantly are going back to who you believe you are because of circumstances and experiences from your childhood. And so, as we talk through, especially our own personal experiences, it's sad, like it's triggering. And, I think I will get a little emotional talking about it because it is so part of, like, I'm going to say, my DNA. It's in me, and it's something that I will probably have to work on for the rest of my life. And I'm okay because I'm so much better than I used to be. And so there's a lot of promise there. And that's kind of what I want to share with people, is that even though something's really hard to talk about or to go through or to recollect and remember, having an outlet and being able to talk to somebody or express or reflect is one way of stepping into it so that you can get through it. So I
Mhm.
just want to be cognizant that these are hard conversations, and sometimes it touches on trigger points that will trigger people.
Mhm.
Okay, so root causes, it's, a lot of lack of, like, emotional connection or physical connection, social connection, anxiety. And what I also want to throw out there is your level of self-awareness. So, people who aren't familiar with being able to self-reflect or self-aware, become self-aware of their circumstances or the root cause of things, then it does cause some loneliness, and that'll contribute to the feelings that you're having. And so that is something we'll talk about later. But loneliness can sometimes, be rooted in the childhood trauma, like I said. And it often can be in conjunction with other emotions. And we briefly talked about that earlier. So I just want to give an example of that. For instance, so you have an argument with your partner where you feel your voice isn't being heard, or you're unable to find your voice in that moment. That can contribute to the feeling of being lonely, even though the not finding your voice or not being heard in itself is its own life challenge and its own kind of issue that has to be looked at and self-reflected on. But it contributes to that feeling of loneliness and not being cared for, right?
Mhm.
Do you have any
My thoughts on that are, or what that led my brain down, is that there are a lot of times, this is not just with loneliness, this can be with many feelings. But if we feel, like you said, if we're feeling unheard by our partner, and it's making us feel lonely because maybe it's a pattern, and it's so we're regularly feeling like there's some disconnect there and we're feeling lonely. And then, and maybe we're not even aware of it, or maybe we are, but then at work, maybe our boss isn't talking to us in the way that we need them to, or as much as we need them to, or we're in some type of environment where we're not getting something social that we need. And so we're feeling lonely at work. And if things with our romantic partner were fine and we didn't have that loneliness at home, then when we were at work, we might not really notice it. But because we're sort of primed to think that we're feeling lonely because of one situation, which might be a legitimate situation. It's not to say that it's that we're making it up in our heads, but we might not always notice all the little things that would make us feel lonely if we weren't feeling something more extreme in one area. And then we start to sort of overgeneralize, and we see one tiny little bit of something that might make us feel lonely. And then maybe we expand too much on it and we think too hard about it. Or that, it might not necessarily be a bad thing. Maybe there are legitimate multiple spots in your life where you are feeling lonely. But I do think that a lot of times we might feel it strongly in one area, and then it makes us feel stronger than we might need to in other areas of our life, because we're just so primed to be thinking about it.
Yeah, that's true. And especially depending on, the origin of why you maybe are feeling loneliness. It depends on how traumatic that was, right? And it might not be something that you see or can clearly see. But that's part of, the self-reflection and awareness that I talked about as far
Yeah.
as, one of the root causes or what can exemplify it or make it feel larger than it actually is. But so what I wanted to then go into is kind of our first memories of loneliness. Shall I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so when I was 9, my 16-year-old brother passed away unexpectedly, and it caused, like, I mean, total chaos and traumatic experiences for everybody, my entire family. And part of the issue that I am constantly, I think, dealing with when it comes to loneliness is feeling also abandoned by my parents, because they were, mourning and in grief. And at 9 years old, I didn't understand or have any concept of uh, you know, the way people react in the face of death. And so I didn't have a family that would, talk about my brother, or at least when I was around. I mean, they surely could have been talking about him amongst themselves. But one instance in particular that I think really cemented loneliness in my life was the week following his death. I had to go back to school. I was in fourth grade and just sobbing, not wanting to go to school, just not ready. And I
Of
was in the
course.
garage and getting my bike ready
Hmm.
to ride my bike to fourth grade. And
Mm.
my mom, I'm begging my mom, begging her to just
Oh.
let me stay home. And she is just distraught and not understanding why she is distraught, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that I am grieving in some kind of way, missing my brother, very traumatic, but not understanding as her as a mother. I mean, that's just not
Hmm.
realistic, right? At 9 to have those
Yeah.
concepts. So she is getting angry and upset because I'm not willing to, leave the house and go to school. And I'm putting up a fight and I'm
Hmm.
begging and I start crying and I'm yelling. And she grabbed me by the shoulders and started, I'm going to say shaking. It was not violent, but it was
Hmm.
enough that it got my attention.
Hmm.
And she yelled, "You are going to school." And
Hmm.
that was it. Like that was the first time I feel that I had no voice.
Yeah.
And it created so many issues
Hmm.
throughout my life,
Yeah.
of feeling lonely. I mean, it was not only just, not being able to get my needs cared for, but also just not being able to verbalize in a way that somebody else could understand what I needed and what I thought was best for me. That was at
Yeah.
9.
Yeah.
And so it just really instilled some deep insecurities and self worth issues that I have been struggling for my entire life. And, I share this because I, I want I want people to understand that when you're a child, you cannot be expected to understand adult things, and it's
Hmm.
not your responsibility. At the
Hmm.
same time, when I look back at my parents, I I have had conversations with my mom about, this time frame. they didn't know how to deal with grief, and they certainly didn't know how to parent children while grieving for one child that has passed and died. And suffering that loss created, I'm sure, a lot of issues for each of my siblings and for my parents. And, throughout this podcast and future episodes, I will talk about all of that because it was so much a part of my life and the development of who I am today.
Mm.
And I know other people go through that. And so anyway, going back to loneliness, I just think that really is the root of where I identify it the most with loneliness, as well as many other things.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all of
Of
that. I
course.
think that there are, like you said, there are a lot of people who have had traumatic experiences like that, where they have something happen with their family and their parents just did the best that they could in that situation, but it wasn't exactly what the child needed. And the child wasn't giving the parent what the parent needed either. So, it goes, of course, it goes both ways, but it's really, there's no right answer
No.
necessarily in that situation. And I think that there's so many ways that that same concept comes up. And it's important to talk about them because I think a lot of people, one, aren't even aware of how much those experiences, like you said, it was one moment that made you feel lonely, but what did it actually do? It led you to feeling like you couldn't speak up and your voice doesn't matter. And so I think a lot of people aren't aware of how these situations kind of unfold and go into so many different areas of our lives. But or two, people are aware and they feel alone and
Mhm.
they can't talk about it, or somebody won't understand, or maybe they tried talking about it to somebody and didn't get a good response like they needed, and kind of furthers that feeling of loneliness. So it's important to talk about whenever you are ready to talk about it, which you are,
Yeah.
which I am sure that other people are going to be very grateful for. So, um, I didn't have anything traumatic like that happen with my childhood, leading to, one clear example of feeling lonely. But I did have, as I said at the beginning, I'm very extroverted and I always have been. Um, and I've always been very comfortable in most social situations and been fine with making friends and talking with people, but I've always, for as long as I can remember, still felt lonely. And fortunately, I really like my own company. So I've always been, I think the thing that saved me really was that I've always been really confident in who I am and what I am interested in, what I like, my hobbies. And so when I was little, I always had a sense of loneliness because I was just often interested in things that the other kids weren't interested in. And I'm not saying this to be like, oh, I'm so unique and cool and special, but I didn't have a lot of friends around me who were interested in reading the little almanac that my parents got for me at the bookstore and things like that. Um and I was in gymnastics from the age of 3, and after the first couple years, I tended to be, so when I was probably 6 or so, I tended to be um, on teams where there were a lot of girls who were older than me, and that shouldn't have mattered necessarily, but I was always picked on, and I was kind of an easy target because I was younger, and I tended to just kind of roll over and let people walk all over me. And anyway, so um, the feeling of knowing that the kids around me weren't always interested in what I was interested in, but like so much just kind of going forward with what I wanted to talk about, or what my little hobbies were, or what I wanted to spend my time doing, coupled with the the older kids especially, but even the kids who are my age, just kind of, taking advantage of me because I didn't stand up for myself. It led to a lot of feelings of loneliness throughout my whole childhood. And then And then that just kind of, I guess, just kept going. And like I said, I've always been confident in myself. So at least I didn't lose myself in trying too hard, at least to not be who I was and be who other people were or what they expected of me. Not that I was perfect at that, but most of the time I kept a good sense of self. But um, the way that it's shown up in my, later teen years and then into adulthood is just becoming a different person, as we all go through stages in our lives. And so just kind of figuring out who I am. And then, every once in a while, every couple of years or whatever, as I kind of rediscover a different part of myself and a different direction that I want to go with my life, than looking around at my friends or whoever's around me, regularly at that time, being like, are these people that are continuing to serve me on the path that I want to go down? Or are we really, are our paths aligning? Are we really matching up anymore? And there's been a lot of times where the answer has been no. And so just kind of winding my way through different friend groups has been very, very difficult at times. And I think very relatable, because I think most people go through that. Um, but but yeah, I feel every year that passes, I feel more and more comfortable with who I do have around me and who I am as a person. And once you become an adult, there's a lot of things that when you're a kid, you realize don't really matter as much anymore, And so the feelings of loneliness for me have shifted over time, but there wasn't one big specific moment, but there was just a lot of kind of general and vague feelings of loneliness throughout my childhood. So I'm glad that we have different experiences with it,
I
because I
was
think
just going to say that is that I'm actually, because you and I have briefly talked about loneliness, but we've actually
Mhm.
never really gotten into deeply like
Mhm.
the root of it or how it's transpired over each of our lifetimes. And so I wanted to say how thankful I am that we actually do have very different experiences. Can I
Yeah,
ask a follow-up question on
of
something?
course.
So when you talk about that assessment of kind of the relationships that you're in,
Mhm.
um and I bring this up because oh my gosh, like that makes me so nervous, right? To think about oh my gosh, yeah, assessing what's serving me in my relationships. I mean, I will say in the last 3 years, I've definitely been on that track and have gardened the friendship
Yeah.
garden, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
that's more in my sightline now than
Mhm.
ever. It was never in my sightline. But can you talk a little bit about how you got to the point to recognize, because that's a self-worth thing.
Mhm.
That's a
Yeah.
seeing yourself as a valuable partner in relationships and that you equally deserve that from other
Right.
people as well as contributing.
Yeah. I think that the first uh big friendship overhaul, if you will, that I feel like I noticed was um, going from high school to college. And I think that's a very normal time for people to feel that. But later in high school, I, I feel like I was hanging out with people. I was hanging out with a solid group of people that I did get along really well with, and we aligned well, and they were positive influences, I would say. But there were also people that I was hanging out with who just weren't, not even negative, as in I was becoming a bad kid, but I just wasn't acting authentically who I am all the time. And so I think that my first year of college, it really hit me. I had a really good friend who we were we were very aligned in a positive way. And I wasn't spending time with that person and talking with that person because there were a few other people who I thought were, I don't know, more towards the path that I wanted to go down, to keep it all general. Um, I just sort of got lost a little bit. And that was one of those times in my life, I think, where I realized that the most, where like, okay, I need to shift who I'm spending my time with, because they're not actually, these people aren't making me feel like me, and they're not making me feel okay to be myself. And I notice that I'm becoming a different person, not in a way that I want for myself when I'm around them. And so that was probably the first time. And then it just kind of kept happening every couple years. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I don't know if that makes me too quick to overturn friendships, or if that just meant that I was um, really working on uh, like kind of rapidly figuring out who I was. And so maybe a little bit of both. But I know a couple times just throughout college that I was like, okay, this group that I have now been hanging out with, I don't think that they are um, the type of people that I need. I don't think that they need me, and I don't think that I need them in a way that makes sense for where our lives are all going. But we all felt like we needed to keep spending time with each other because, proximity or whatever, we felt like it made sense for us to keep seeing each other. And then I sort of reflected and was like, I don't think that's actually the case. I don't think that we can stay friendly, of course, but I don't think that I actually need to cultivate these friendships in the way that I feel like we're kind of told that we have to do when we're younger. Especially when you're a kid in school, elementary, middle, and high school, you're around the same kids so often, all day long, sometimes for years. And so you just kind of you're expected to just keep cultivating those friendships because you kind of have to. And then it's like a good and bad thing happens when you're not in that situation anymore. And we all know it's really hard to make friends as an adult. So a good thing is that you're not, I use force, but not it, that's too strong of a word, but you're not forced to be around the same people. So you have more flexibility and more opportunities to find different people that just align with what you want. But then also it's really hard because you don't have a stable time necessarily or a stable way to be around the same people. Anyways, I'm getting kind of in the weeds with this, but does that answer your question? I would say that
It
that's kind of how it
does.
started. And then that's
Yeah.
how it evolved as I got older.
Yes, I mean it definitely, I think it's a great example. And you did, I want to go back 1 second before I continue with that. So you did say, I don't know if it was always a good thing, right? So to
Mm-hmm.
me, when you said that, it's like that's a self-reflection
Mm-hmm.
moment where you're just assessing, and I just encourage everyone, literally everybody could do a better job at self-reflection and
Mm-hmm.
awareness. And so if you taking your example, of what you've gone through every couple years or so, you have put yourself in a better spot than where you were, because what I heard you say was that you made changes in your friendship groups because you wanted to be more authentic. You wanted to be around people who um, kind of created the space for that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that you could be
Mm-hmm.
authentic and who you really are. Those are amazing things. Those are improvements in your life. And so that's, I feel like, what we as, living this life really do how we need to view as we move forward in this life is how
Yeah.
can I make my environment better for myself, right? What
Mm-hmm.
choices and decisions, and some of those are very hard, like you said, ending friendships or letting them go is not, we're not taught that. That's not okay.
No.
It's a failure, right?
Yeah.
It's looked
Yeah.
at like a failure. And then not only is it looked like as a general failure in society, but then we have to put the mirror up and say, oh, it must have been me.
Yeah.
And the thing is that it was you making the proper decision for yourself,
Yeah.
right? To live a happier life.
Can I
Absolutely.
say something real quick? So when you just said that we're not taught how to do that, and then we have to put the mirror up and we're a failure. We look at it and we're a failure. That made me think what's really interesting about, and we'll just use this friendship as like breaking up a friendship as an example of it. It's really interesting how we aren't taught how to break up a friendship, which is a very difficult thing to do. We have no skills that we learn how to do. We have to learn
Mhm.
it on our own. And so not only that, but we aren't taught how to self-reflect, like you were talking about. And so we aren't naturally skilled at that. Some people might be a little bit better than others, or it might come easier to some people than others, but we aren't taught that we should self-reflect. We're usually taught that somebody else is doing something wrong. And yet because we're taught, as particularly in our society, to not have very good self-worth, it's really interesting how we're not taught how to self-reflect and how to look at how we might be part of the problem or the problem, but we're also taught to look at ourselves as the failures. And so it's really interesting how we have both of those going on at the same time. So that just kind of popped into my head as you
No,
said
I
that.
mean, yeah, that it's you're 100% right. The skill that we are not given the skills to really care for ourselves the way that we
Mhm.
deserve, which leads to a lot of loneliness, which is the topic
Yeah.
that we're on today, right? I think it all does. I mean, everything that we just talked about for the last like 10 minutes affects so many different parts of our lives. It's not just about the topic for today. I mean,
Yeah,
but it's I mean, I could talk about self-awareness and self-reflection for days
me
because
too.
it truly is the key to making change in your life,
Yeah.
because it is the power within, right?
Hmm.
And if we don't tap into it, we don't understand it, we don't even know we have it, which
Hmm.
is, I think, another way of saying we were never told,
Hmm.
or we never learned how to create that. Some people have it easier than others,
Hmm.
like you said. But yeah, I think this is good. I think we're onto something.
I think so.
What I did, if are we ready to move on to the next phase, do you think?
I think we are.
Okay. So what I wanted to bring up are just 4 points that people wrote in via the Instagram post that I did about asking people to share their challenges with loneliness. And I'm just going to read the four off and then we can have a discussion. So one was that they feel most lonely when there's a lack of emotional connection. Someone else said, I feel lonely when I'm not with my dogs, which I thought was, I know how that feels.
Hmm.
Also, someone said, I feel lonely when feel like I'm not being prioritized.
Hmm.
And then when I feel lonely when there's a lack of compassion.
Hmm.
So as I mentioned earlier, loneliness comes from lacking of emotional connection, physical connection, social, from anxiety, and again the level of where we are in our awareness. The one about not feeling prioritized kind of hit home for me.
Hmm.
That definitely, if I go back to the story, my personal story of where I feel the root of my loneliness comes from, yeah, that not feeling a priority in my mother's life as a 9-year-old, again, like
Yeah.
keeping context, front and center. Um, that uh, that has been a theme throughout my life when I want something or feel that I should be able to, you know, charge forth with a need or a want or a dream and getting denied because of, X, Y, and Z with keeping it very general.
Hmm.
Um, that's where I feel like my just the want of it can't even be heard, or the dream of my, the scope of my dream like can't even be heard, and then I'm not being prioritized. Is that
Hmm.
the reality of the situation? Probably not, but that is the feeling that I've had in so many relationships, work and personal, friendships, my partnerships, all, I
Hmm.
mean, it's just throughout. So that one really got me.
Hmm.
Do any of those connect with you?
I think that the priority one does connect with me, but I think that the one that feels most relevant for my life, or the one that I connect with the most, is the lack of emotional connection. Um, I think that, or like the disconnect. I think that that's something that I didn't feel like I got enough of when I was a child, and so I've definitely carried that through my whole life, and that's something that's really important to me. And um, I mean, just ask my husband. And so I think that that's something that when I'm feeling a lack of emotional connection, and with any relationship that I have, no matter where that relationship exists in my life, I think that that's something that that definitely makes me feel the loneliest.
Yeah, for sure. Um, okay, so I think the next step is to talk about how to really work with loneliness because I actually believe that I feel like, and I could be wrong, and maybe a professional could tell me something different. Um, but I feel like once you have this experience through an event or like loneliness, I feel like it doesn't go away because you just tell it to go away, or like it's
Yeah.
something that will come up throughout your lifetime in different ways. And so I just want to say, like, I don't believe that any emotion should just be banished, like even hate and jealousy and envy. Like, I think what is how I will work with clients and how I talk to people is it's not about denying the emotion. It's about understanding it and working with it
Hmm.
and finding ways to help live through it, right? Like,
Yeah.
if we take grief as an example and people who like if we take my mother for an example, never ever should she be told that she should no longer grieve, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
that's such a denial of like her core
Hmm.
and I mean it would just be so damaging. And so if we wouldn't tell, if I wouldn't tell my mother that, why should I tell myself, that I shouldn't also deal with
Right.
have grief or live in loneliness or have
Hmm.
loneliness. So that's kind of an overall view of how I believe we should live within the emotions that we have, right?
Hmm.
And so what I want to talk about is one that we need to have patience for ourselves. We do need to have like an expression of self-love when we're working
Hmm.
with our emotions. And I also think we should congratulate ourselves for how far we have come, right? Even
Hmm.
if you think like, well, all I did was remember a time where I was lonely. That's huge
Hmm.
because you're recognizing that it's an experience that you had, right? And I also want that's a positive change, a positive step toward working through it. And for many people, and me included, I mean, it takes multiple experiences for the learning and the listening of concepts to actually sink in. It's not that you're going to listen to this podcast and just you're going to be fine, right? It's going to be maybe listen to this podcast and then you see an article, in the newspaper or whatever online. I'm dating myself in the online newspaper. Maybe you have a conversation with a friend. You know what I mean? Like there's multiple experiences and things of information that are going to come in before you start to be able to actually self-assess and self-reflect and be
Hmm.
aware of your involvement in this emotion.
Hmm.
So I want to start suggesting like ways to work with loneliness, right? So we've talked a lot about self-reflection and awareness, and basically as a reminder, that's how you view yourself in the world, specifically in this situation or this feeling or the challenge that you're going through, and it's multi-layered. And so I like to have people ask themselves, kind of, are you advocating for yourself, to yourself and to others in these feelings, right? Are you thinking about ways that you can um, change maybe a habit that you have that causes this loneliness, or not even change, but reflect upon it? Like, why do I actually binge eat a candy bar because I'm
Hmm.
lonely, which is something I have done, right? And so it's okay to ask yourself those questions and be an advocate for yourself on your behalf, to yourself, to have those inner dialogues and those questions and be okay with the answers that are going to come forth. Um, can you brainstorm ways of, helping yourself through the feeling? Is there something that you can do differently to take steps in a direction that will give you positive feelings, like to test things out and to assess how you feel, and then test other things out if that didn't work? It's like our life is really an experiment, and if we start treating it like that, we're going to find what really helps us to thrive.
Hmm.
Any? comments on that or thoughts or suggestions that you might have with
Um,
self-reflection?
yeah, I mean, one thing or two things that really that pop out to me are from what you were talking about are how I have done that self-reflect, or I've been trying to work on doing that self-reflection for myself, noticing when I feel the loneliest. So I have so many insecurities with friendships because, of what I mentioned earlier about feeling that loneliness, and like I didn't have an emotional connection with the kids around me because I felt like I was so different, and it was told to me how different I was. Um, and so, what I have always done, and whether it's because of this or not, because of this feeling of loneliness, I've always put so much energy into my friendships, too much for what the friend was willing to reciprocate. And all that did was, again, I feel like this is another good and bad. Like I think it's a good thing for somebody to put in energy into their whatever relationships they have, of course. But um, the bad thing is that I would put so much into it, not get that reciprocated, and then feel really insecure and lonely. And I've realized that I could just not give 150% of myself into all of my friendships and stop reinforcing that feeling of loneliness. And it was like I almost got addicted to that feeling. I was so used to having that feeling of, well, nobody is reciprocating the feelings of our friendship the way that I am. And oh, woe is me. I'm putting all of this in and nobody's returning it. And while I think that that was true in some cases, that there were just people that weren't good friends, I think that it was a lot of that's not where they were at with what they needed. And, the friendship could have just looked differently if I had not kind of tried to manipulate it into what I thought that I needed. And so I've done a lot of reflection with realizing how much I was enforcing my own loneliness without even recognizing that that's something I was doing. And I will recommend a podcast if that's okay that helped me
Mhm.
with that. It's called You Made It Weird. And I'll figure out which episode it was if I can remember, because it was probably at least a year ago that I listened to this and it really hit me. But the hosts were talking about how there are so many little ways that we kind of get addicted and force ourselves into a habit of a bad thing that we don't even realize that we're doing. And it's often a feeling with a friendship or a romantic relationship. And we're totally enforcing that by causing that situation to happen at all. And it's doing is reinforcing that little thing inside of us that we feel like we need to feed, that's telling us that we should be insecure about it.
It's
Or
like the
yeah,
self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
totally.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
100%.
that's something that jumped to my mind as you were talking about that. And then another thing that has been well, that's one thing that's been helpful for me to kind of mitigate my feelings of loneliness, is recognizing, am I doing something that is reinforcing this feeling? Is there something that I've done to create it in the first place? Um, and then another thing that has been helpful for me with my marriage is simply saying, I feel lonely or I feel disconnected right now. And it sounds so simple, but it's really helpful to just verbalize those words, whether it is somebody that you are in a romantic relationship with, or a friend, or your boss, or somebody. Obviously, it depends on the relationship, and it's not all on you to just say those words and everything will be perfect after that. The other person has to hear you and they have to respond to it. But there are so many times in our lives where we just don't even verbalize how we're feeling. And then we sit there and then do that self-fulfilling prophecy thing by just sitting there and being like, well, I feel so alone. And it's like, well, have you even verbalized it? If you're at that point where you can, and you recognize that you're feeling lonely, and you know that the person that you are feeling lonely because of, or if there's some type of friendship where that's causing those feelings of loneliness, and you can pinpoint it, of course they have to be a safe person that you can say that to. It's not that you can just
Right.
say that to anybody. But I think that there are many, many, many situations where we have some type of feeling. And we'll use loneliness as an example where we don't even verbalize that we're feeling that way. And so somebody might have no idea that we're feeling some type of disconnect, or we aren't feeling like we're being prioritized, or we're not feeling like the person's giving us compassion. And so it's been very helpful for me to just verbalize the feelings. And then at least, okay, I've verbalized it. I've done my part, or I've taken a big step just to say it. And then whatever happens beyond that can be further steps. But if you don't even take that first step, if it is somebody that you can talk to, then you kind of can't really blame anybody, because you're just, it's just kind of floating there and the other person might not even know.
Right. I think to all of that, your point. So great points. I think that if you don't verbalize your needs, then the person that, your partner or your friend or whatever, they can't create the space for you. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if they're in the relationship with you and their willingness to work on, whatever the bumps in the roads might be, like, that's how my spouse and I are treating our relationship, and it's improved greatly. And over the last year, we've stopped getting upset and holding it all in. Right.
Yeah.
And so we've decided that, hey, when we're feeling like that, we have to say something. We can't go through the rest of the day not telling each other how that conversation or how that behavior made us feel, because we're going to be miserable all day. Like, that's all we're going to think about.
Isn't
And
it amazing how much easier conversations and potential disagreements can become when you just verbalize it?
yeah. I mean, it's like, it's not always comfortable.
No.
When you're being told that, something you said or just did has just created inner chaos in your
Mm-hmm.
spouse, like it's it's scary, and we'll talk about all the, I mean, these are
Yeah.
just topics that I think are so important for future discussions. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, when you're ready and willing to receive that feedback, and even if it's hard to hear, if you're able to just hold the space for that person to let you know how they're feeling, and you can love them through all of your discomfort, it is a game changer. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a game changer in how deep, much more deep, a relationship can actually go. Um, and it's fun. It's fun in a weird way,
Yeah.
because you're
Yeah.
seeing somebody who, and me too. I also would hold things in. So hopefully, John can see like um, how it's changed my life to be able to have those conversations with him when I'm in
Mm-hmm.
need, right?
Yeah. One other
So, yeah.
thing, real quick, that well, actually, two quick things that also jumped out at me as you were talking, with the how to not deny, or it's important to not deny your emotions and to feel them. I think that that's really important. I think that, um, or I know that men in particular in our culture are not taught to have emotions, and to have that self-awareness. I think that women are starting to be, and I'm completely generalizing here, I understand that, and I'm being very binary, but for the most part, women are taught that it's more okay to be more in tune with our emotions. Not that we're given specific skill sets to deal with these things, but it's at least more accepted that women can be emotional. And men are taught to deny everything. And so I think it's really important to, one, if you're a male and listening to this and you have been taught to hold things in and to deny everything, to learn to be okay with not necessarily denying your emotions, but observing that they exist and that you feel them, and that's fine. And just at least starting with that. And then also, if you are experiencing some type of relationship or friendship or whatever with a male, and they're not opening up the way that you need them to, or they're not telling you that they're lonely or whatever, recognizing that that's a very real concept that they're trying to battle. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because I think it's really hard for men to feel comfortable with not denying their emotions, but actually feeling them. And then another thing that that you made me think about is we learned a lot about mindfulness in my psychology classes that I took at Oregon State. They were very that university was very good at teaching not just the science aspect of psychology, but what that means in different cultures as well. And mindfulness training is something that's very prevalent in a lot of other cultures besides ours, and it's becoming more popular here. Of course, I think that it's kind of blown up in the past couple of years, but the quick, bullet points that really stuck out to me for mindfulness when I was learning them years ago and that have really helped me is noticing that you have emotions, because denying them doesn't help anybody, and it certainly doesn't help you when you're feeling something strongly. And you using the example, Kelly, of trying to tell your mother to stop grieving, you wouldn't do that. That's not okay. That doesn't help anybody. But smaller emotions, same thing. You shouldn't deny them. Just observe them, notice them. And it helps me, at least, to remember that emotions, by definition, are a temporary feeling. And that doesn't mean that they're temporary and they go away forever, but they're not necessarily a permanent fixture on who you are or what is happening in your life. They're temporary, and you don't necessarily have control over the emotion hitting you, but you do have control over how you let it impact you and how you respond to it. And so just being okay with recognizing, noticing, observing your ugly emotions that come in, your negative emotions, and just sitting with them and kind of pulling yourself out of your body a little bit if you can. And just saying like, oh, that's an emotion that's passing through me right now. I'm going to check into that, and maybe don't do it in the moment, or do think about it in the moment, whatever works for you, whatever makes the most sense for different situations. But just recognizing that's an emotion. There's a reason why that emotion is what's hitting me right now. I'm going to look into that later when I cool down or whatever. And, trying to look into it deeper, but also just observing it as something. It's a thing that's happening to you, and that's all that it needs to be, unless it needs to become something more. So not letting it completely overtake your life, and not letting it on the other side not exist at all. Kind of being there in the middle.
That's a great point. Okay, so I wanted to bring up a way of, I guess the next thing is like I'm going to call it like building systems of support, right? And these are just some suggestions and ways that you can connect with others. And sometimes it might be a challenge, but I want to talk about one way that helped me kind of, I mean, it definitely helped me connect with you, Megan, on a much deeper level. And I want to suggest it to people because I think that, especially with the pandemic and not being able to be in everyone's presence all the time, the use of technology just became so much easier. I mean, via Zoom or other apps like the one I'm going to talk about. But one way that if you have friends that maybe you aren't able to see as often as you'd like, but you have a good connection with them. And I think that the app Marco Polo is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely wonderful to be able to connect with people in a different way, right? So the
Yeah.
concept of Marco Polo is it's a video app, and you could probably explain it better than me, but
Mm-hmm.
basically you video yourself talking to your friend that you're going to send that video to through the app, and they can watch it at their convenience, and then they can respond. And I think it helped our relationship grow.
Mm-hmm.
And also the connection and the subject matter that we talked about, it really helped me to kind of open myself up, because I definitely was coming from a place of being closed off.
Mm-hmm.
And it's helped me to share intimate stories and
Mm-hmm.
to feel like it's a safe place. And obviously you help create that environment for me. But
Mm-hmm.
Marco Polo was a way of us, being able to contribute to each other in that way. And
Mm-hmm.
so, one way of getting like working with loneliness is reaching out to friends and family
Mhm.
members where you do feel safe. Everything that you just said, like having
Mhm.
people in your life, if you have them, to be able to talk to them and tell them how you're feeling. And if it can't be in person, then you have that phone, right? And there are so
Yeah.
many apps and different ways that you can connect with people now. And I will say, I was awkward as fuck on Marco Polo at first, but the more I used it, the easier it came. And now Megan cannot get rid of me. So
Yeah, nobody can get rid of me on Marco Polo. I'm on it a lot. It's a very big part of my life now. But
tell
it's
me,
helped.
yeah,
I
tell us
mean,
how it's helped.
yeah, well, the I would say that there are three people that I talk to very regularly on Marco Polo now, and it's been very transformative. My sister introduced me to it, and prior to using Marco Polo, we didn't talk that much at all. And so when she suggested that I download this app, I was kind of like, another app to download, like,
Mhm.
but I really wanted that connection with my sister, and I was willing to download yet another app if it was going to help us connect. And it immediately I noticed the benefits because we didn't have matching schedules so that we could talk on the phone or FaceTime together. And, texting just wasn't really cutting it for the emotional connection that we needed to build. And so it was so helpful for us. And then um, there's other people, other, friends that I've had who have also had the app that I kind of talk to here and there. And it's just nice, even if you don't really talk that much on it, just to kind of have it there. But then Kelly, with you, that was so helpful because we went from seeing each other regularly, um, early on in our friendship to not seeing each other at all when we weren't working together anymore. And our schedules were so different. It was just unrealistic for us to be able um, to meet up as often as we wanted to. And so Marco Polo really allowed us to talk. Like, I mean, it feels like we talk constantly every day, even though we don't necessarily, but it feels like we have, you know, so much of a connection just because we're able to make it convenient for both of us with our very mismatched schedules. And like you said, it's been really helpful for talking about a lot of deeper topics that we don't always have the time, like the times we've gone to get tea or something. We end up talking for way longer than I think we both intended, but we don't always have time to meet in person and to sit down and really get into like really big discussions, which we like to do. We both really like to talk. I mean, well, that's why we're starting a podcast talking about these things. And
True.
so, if we had to rely on just seeing each other in person, which isn't realistic for our world really anymore, then it wouldn't have happened, I guess, much as we've been able to talk now. And then my one of my closest friends who I've known for a very long time now, 20 years actually. She now lives in a different country. And so Marco Polo has been really helpful for us to be able to keep up that connection. And her and we've been talking regularly for 20 years, but now it's a lot. The conversations we're able to have are a lot more thorough, I guess, and we're able to get into deeper topics more often um, than we were before because living in a very different time zone doesn't make it easy to talk on the phone as much as we'd like and stuff. So, anyways, that's how Marco Polo has helped my life
Yeah,
and
I mean,
really forge good connections with people.
yeah, it's super easy to use. And so I know this is so cliche for podcasts, but I'll put it in the show notes.
Yes,
I don't even know what show notes are, but I'll
I
figure
know.
it
We'll
out by
figure
the
it out.
time you
Yeah.
publish this. Another suggestion which has helped me is like getting outside, like breathing
Mm,
fresh air and taking a 5-minute walk. And for me, listening to the birds is so
mhm,
calming. And just,
mhm.
if anything, meditation also helps, but it's just anything that can recenter and kind of calm your nervous system down a little bit when you're feeling those heightened emotions is really helpful. Pets obviously are a great way
Mhm.
to just, again, it's almost, as you're giving them attention, it's almost like a little meditation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course dogs, cats are a little bit different. I have two, but dogs are just, they have that natural happiness and joy within them, and that's contagious when you're in their
What
little world.
one of my favorite activities on the entire planet, and what helps me just be happy and also grounds me when I'm feeling all sorts of negative things, is just sitting outside and reading a book or doing a puzzle. And if I have the dogs around me, that's even better. But and drinking a cup of tea, just a simple pleasure like that, um, is always really helpful for me, kind of no matter what mood I'm in. I enjoy it, but especially when I need to feel grounded and I need to feel more like myself. Um, and it just kind of resets me a little bit. And obviously, that's not going to be the exact activity that every person needs, but that's something that I've always liked. In different little ways. I didn't like tea when I was a kid, but so that sort of calming activity, that's always worked really well for me. And I encourage you all as the listeners to think about a simple little activity. And Kelly, you gave some really great suggestions too, just simple things. It doesn't have to be a big, gigantic thing. You don't have to go to some class if you don't want to. Like it
Right.
can be just something really simple that your heart likes, and just doing
Yeah.
those and regularly building those into your routine, I think is also really helpful. So not only doing those little activities that you like only when you're feeling the most heightened, but having them in your schedule as regularly as possible so that you're always kind of coming back to a grounded place as much as you can,
Right.
so that it doesn't just build up and get horrible before you do that.
Yeah. So in your example, you talked about one of the other items that I was going to suggest is the hobbies, right? The hobbies that you
Mm,
enjoy, that bring you joy, that kind of create a calm and soothing space. Like pursuing your interests are, will connect you back to yourself, and sometimes with other people, right? If it's a mutual hobby with somebody else, or if a friend or a family member that wants to do it with you. I mean, those are ways to work through those feelings. On the grander scale, obviously, you can get professional help. I mean, there's life
mhm,
coaches like myself,
mhm,
there's therapists that, will help you to understand and work through those struggles. And so that's definitely an option. Keeping a journal is actually really helpful. It's something that I do. I've gone so far as to tag journal entries based on the emotion that I have so that I can go back to them, and just kind of see my thought process. It's a little OCD, but it actually has helped me just work through, and also to acknowledge like, wow, I've come a long way.
mhm,
My outputs, the behaviors that I have from particular emotions, the damaging ones have lessened or are gone in many
mhm,
cases. And so keeping a journal and just jotting down your current mindset, and if you can reflect upon where it came from or what conversation or situation kind of spurred on the feelings that you have, it's helpful to kind of get it out of your brain and onto paper or whatever mechanism you use for journaling.
mhm,
And then the last one that I had, and I think you'll have a lot to say about this,
mhm,
is self-care, but in a very different way than I think we're taught right
mhm,
now on social media. But eating
mhm,
eating whole foods, movement,
mhm.
sleep, like all important things. And it also, I will also throw in like taking a shower, washing your face,
Yeah.
doing things like brushing your teeth, like making sure that you're, physically taking care of your body,
Mhm.
will make you feel better. It'll
Yeah.
lighten the mindset a little bit.
Yeah. Simple things like that. Not, I mean, if it does work for you and you're, you know, um, at a point in your life where you do these things, then, like the bath bombs and all of
Right.
that, like, sure. But that's not, self-care has kind of turned into that because that's what's trendy and looks good on social media. But
Hmm.
that's not realistic for a mother of three toddlers to be able to like have a bath bomb and like
Right.
like that's not, that sort of thing isn't necessarily practical for everybody. So I think you gave good examples, Kelly. Self-care is simply just making sure that you're taking care of yourself. And sometimes that means looking at yourself and realizing the ways that you're not taking care of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
like downing a bag of um, Cheetos or candy is, I mean, I'm not going to say like, don't eat any bad foods. That's not my point. But um, self care is not indulging in things that are not good for you all the time and then labeling it as taking care of yourself. So self care is a lot of times looking at your habits that you have and recognizing that you might be doing things that aren't making you feel good. And there are other little habits that you could add into your routine that are going to make you feel better. But then, yeah, like just simply washing your face and taking a shower
Mm-hmm.
they go a really long way, especially when you're like in the pit of feeling super lonely.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to remember to do simple things to take care of yourself.
Yeah, I agree. I think I can think upon many times where especially movement and
Mm-hmm.
eating whole foods where I would not be choosing those
Mm-hmm.
and feeling physically worse, an
Yeah.
hour or two later. And that's real. I mean,
Yeah.
sugar is going to do that and has definitely done that to me.
Mm-hmm.
So as we kind of wrap up, is there any other points or anything that you want to share?
I mean, I'm sure I could talk for literally forever, but I don't think that there's anything that's desperate to come out of my little brain right now.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to tell everyone thank you for listening.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that I do hope that you found value in the
Mhm.
discussion and the content and everything that we've talked about. We also would love to know, how you experience loneliness and if you have situational questions about loneliness or really anything, we would love to provide like supplemental podcasts where we're just answering questions,
Yeah. Well,
you
and
know?
it would also be cool to hear what people do to help with their loneliness if they have um, little activities or ways to think about it and process it or whatever it is. If people have something that's helpful, that would be also cool to hear about because there's probably, if it works for you, it probably works for somebody else as well.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's part of like creating community, right? Where you can connect with other people and
Mm-hmm.
know that you're not alone. It's really important to hear other people's experiences, so you feel less alone.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to go over just some future episodes that I'm really interested and can't wait to record. And then Megan's going to share some of hers. And then again, the cliche of how you can reach us,
Mm-hmm.
again, you can subscribe to this podcast and give us a review. I have a newsletter, a personal newsletter that goes out. You can subscribe to that at kellynewsome.com. And then I'll also add where you can send voice memos and emails, which our email address is yourfuturetherapistpodcast@gmail.com. But I'm excited about future episodes where we talk about, parenting and um, how, as a parent, you respond to your child's, childhood trauma.
I'm so excited for this one.
Yeah, I mean, I have personal experience that as with my mother, right? How we've been able to talk about my own trauma, and then have experienced it and actually look forward to the day that my children come to me for that same type of support. So I want to talk about that because it's like critical in my mind, that parents understand that that's part of their responsibility of continuing to raise even adult children. I also want to talk about a title or concept of stop being a fixer and learn to be a listener. I
Yes.
think that's super important, because we want to fix things that are uncomfortable to us, and that's not always the best solution or wanted, right?
Yes. Yeah. Because just because it's uncomfortable for us does not
Mhm.
mean that we can manipulate the situation to
Which is
fit
a
our
whole
needs.
nother topic is manipulation, right? For our
Hmm.
comfort and how we manipulate others in relationships and the um, really the talk track of many parts of our life so that we're more comfortable in it. How about
Yes.
you? What are you looking forward to?
Well, those obviously, but I'm really looking forward to when we discuss coaching.
Mhm.
So Kelly has a lot of experience in volleyball coaching, and then I have experience in gymnastics coaching. And I think that that could be a niche topic, but also I think it kind of you can apply those concepts to a lot of areas in your life. And so I'm very excited to talk about that because I think it's not really talked about that much. Um, there's a lot of people that talk about how to be a good coach, but I
Mhm.
think there's not a lot of discussion on how you can be a bad coach. And I think that we both have learned a lot about ways that we could have been better, and if we were to go back, how we
Yeah.
would change our values and the way that we interact with people. And so I'm really excited about that because I think it's just not something that a lot of people talk about.
No.
Yeah.
No, because it would shine a light on all your mistakes and
Yeah,
failures,
yeah,
which
I
that's what
know.
I'm here for. I'm here to
Me
shine
too.
that light on myself. No,
I,
I can't wait for that one either. I
yeah.
mean, I can wait, but I also can't wait.
No, it'll be good. I'm
It
excited
will.
for when we do that.
Yeah.
I'm also excited about talking about how we use an identity to think about ourselves, and to think about other people. That's something that I have it's like been rattling around in my brain for like 15 years. And I just like can't stop thinking about it in all of these different ways. And so I'm excited about that one. And I'm excited about when we talk about procrastination, because again, I think that's something that so many people deal with and experience. And there's so many like, you know, blogs and tips and all of this stuff to how to not procrastinate. But like, what does procrastination actually mean? And
Yeah,
why do we do it? And
that's a
so,
great one. I'm taking a business program, and in one of the lessons, the instructor said, "Oh no, there's a book about how procrastination is actually amazing." So I'm like, "What?"
mhm.
So yeah, so in preparation of that one, I want to
Mhm.
research that a little bit more. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, the podcast, I think, is going to go over a lot of things. And like I said, it may not match, one episode may not match maybe your own experiences, but it's always great to learn new perspectives and to
Yeah,
understand how to build your empathy muscle, which
exactly.
which is next to self-reflection. I think the second most important part about being a human being
Yeah.
is whether or not you can show empathy to others. And basically it's, you don't have to take on what other people are feeling, but understanding and having compassion for others that are experiencing something that you may not understand is such, it's like a superpower,
Yeah.
because it builds connection and community. And honestly, it helps people feel less lonely.
Yes. And it's also not always about you.
Yes.
Sometimes what somebody says has nothing to do with you. It's all about what's going on with them. And if you don't have an understanding of what they're going through, not that you need to know every detail, but you haven't learned or exercised your empathy muscle, if you don't even know like at all where they're coming from, you're just going to like, it's just going to be about you in
Yeah.
your head. And that's not always the case. And I would just like to say, the reason why we're even doing this podcast is likely because of Marco Polo.
I think that that's true. I think they should maybe be our first sponsor.
I think so too. And we might have eventually gotten to this point,
Yeah.
because I think that we were kind of destined to do this, but I think that everything was able to happen at a good pace, I guess, with the way our friendship has unfolded
Right.
and then what we want to do moving forward in a partnership together. It's all thanks to Marco Polo. So
Yes. Yes, that's very true. And with that, we'll close out our first episode and we'll be back. Thank
thank
you.
you, everyone.